Oh, frameworks are so complicated. I don't need this. Yeah, we can tell. It's not like it doesn't have any consequences, right? That's not like a secret. You're paying in something to get the simplicity. Okay, you're trying to defend like React or whatever. Sell him on GraphQL. Like the irony is that he's not even using the modern PHP, so like he doesn't know that. He hasn't seen Laravel. He hasn't seen like all the services and all the education of new developers that they're doing, right? So like he's just repeating what he heard from anime profile pictures on Twitter, and they are saying this about Vercel and JavaScript, right? Levels AO, he did a podcast with Lex Fridman. Everyone was freaking out. They were like, "Oh, finally he's showing our people or whatever." And there was like too much stuff happening on Twitter, so like I didn't have the energy to read all of it because it's hard to have nuanced takes on Twitter, right? So like everyone was trying to be very pro his opinion or like anti his opinion. If you say something along the lines, yeah, it depends, like it could work, right? It's like no one's going to retweet your thing. For those who don't have any context, um, I think that like this is the whole context, right? This part of the screen is that there is a guy who's kind of like a serial entrepreneur, I guess, right? He just like builds a bunch of different projects. A lot of them are like AI, right? So like out of this out of this list, like half of it is AI, and and like his tech stack is not very fancy. Let's call it this way, right? And they in the podcast they kind of like start to talk about tech stack, and I think I want to play kind of like through the whole section of that, and I want to start kind of like here, right, where he was showing his application, and Lex was like very impressed the about UI, right?
Hope not. This is the end of my career.
Or the beginning.
Right, and it's like this is this is what happens, right? Like uh, is looking at like the window.alert uh, kind of like message, right? And Lex is like, wow, this is such a cool interface. This is like this is how this section starts, right?
Depends. We can send you a push notification when your
Yeah,
photos are
it's
done. Yeah,
okay.
all right, cool.
Yeah, let's see.
Oh wow! So this whole interface he built. This
Yeah.
is really
Right? So like he just saw window.alert and he's like, wow, this is such a cool interface. Did you build it all yourself? Right? And it's like if you're anywhere near professional, right, you're like, what do you mean good interface? Like why is this text not centered? Like this take photo is like too low, and the space that you have on the text here and the space that you have on the arrow here, it's the same, but design wise you should probably kind of like move it around so like it has a bit less space on like where you have the arrow, right? So like you as a as someone who works with design, you're like, no, like there are like hundreds of things that you can do better, right? You probably don't want to have like this cutout like UI or whatever. You want to maybe like do the like fancier scroll bars or whatever. Like so like if you want to make it look like you're a professional designer, you would spend a ton of time on all of this, right? You wouldn't you wouldn't just leave it in this state, but like it was impressive enough kind of like for Lex.
really well
It's all
done.
jQuery. So I still use jQuery, the
Yes,
only one
still
after
to
10
this
years.
day, you're not the only one. The entire of the web
Yeah.
is PHP. The
It's
stack
PHP and jQuery. Yeah. And SQLite.
you're just like one of the top performers from a programming perspective that are still like openly talking about it. But everyone's using PHP. Like if you
Yeah, so I think um, the nuance that you would usually lose on Twitter, right, is they just mentioned like three things, right? And everyone will read stuff differently, right? So he said, I'm using PHP, jQuery, and SQLite, right? So all the PHP fans are like, yes, he is a hero. We're like, he's ours, right? All the jQuery holdouts, they're like, oh, this is great. Like, finally, someone represents jQuery, right? And like, in SQLite, I heard a lot of people, even like, I was watching this video from a guy I follow on Twitter, and he said something along the lines like, I would never use SQLite in production. It's like single threaded. And I was like, yeah, but why not? Right? There are like a bunch of use cases where you can use SQLite in production pretty good. And it's like, who cares if it's single threaded, right? Like Node is also single threaded, and it's like it didn't stop anyone. So yeah, so just to kind of like say it out loud, right? PHP, well, it depends, right? So like when he says PHP, he means like index.php and just like no framework, just like cobble everything together as if it is. It's funny that he says like 10 years later I'm still using it. Like he's using it as it was like 15 years ago or like 20 years ago, right? Like not as 10 years ago. Even 10 years ago, we already had a bunch of like frameworks or like Drupal, WordPress, and Symfony and all that stuff, right? Like it's just like, no, I'm just like using PHP. Like I don't care about any of the frameworks. So all the people who are like with fists in with the air, sort of like, yes, he's like our PHP guy, you're probably using like Laravel, right? and he's using like raw PHP. So like you are actually probably like disagreeing with him more than you're agreeing with him. You just like don't want to hear it or whatever, right? And the same thing about like kind of like jQuery, right, or like vanilla JavaScript. There is there's kind of like a way of kind of like using it right. And I guess it would be fun to kind of like the JavaScript code is like visible, right? Like you don't have to go. Uh, it's not like backend code. We can actually probably look at his front end code and see kind of like how closely to like to the real world it is. But yeah, so I just want to say that like when you say PHP, jQuery, or like especially a lot of time he was saying like, oh, I'm just like using vanilla JavaScript, right? So like you can use vanilla PHP, vanilla JavaScript, and SQLite pretty like successfully, but you also you also probably are using it differently than he does, if that makes sense. So it's like I don't think the pool of his supporters is as big as like people trying to make it look. Like people who are actually doing what he's doing, they did this like 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, like kind of like I did, right? Like, but we are not doing this anymore. So like we understand what he's saying, just like we're not doing that anymore. Okay, let's go let's go further.
If you look, most of the web is still probably
I
PHP and
think
jQuery.
70%. It's because of WordPress, right? Because the blogs are.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
I'm seeing a revival now. People are getting sick of frameworks. Like all the JavaScript frameworks are so like, what do you call it? Like wieldy. Like it takes so much work to just maintain this code, and then it updates to a new version. You need to change everything. PHP.
Yeah, so I saw a lot of people criticizing him for this part, and like the criticism is basically like, well, you don't know what you're talking about, and part of it is yes, of course he doesn't, right? Right? Like that's the whole point is that like he looks from it from the outside, and it seems complicated to him, and he sees like people complaining on Twitter that's like all complicated, right? He's like, well, it must be complicated, right? But there's some truth to that, right? So like um, if you build everything kind of like without any dependencies, right? Or if your dependency is like jQuery 1.3, you don't have to update, right? Like you can just like leave it as is, kind of like indefinitely, which is finally that like that's the reason why I stopped using PHP, for example, right? I used to have like some websites running on PHP, and it was like the one that I have in mind. It was like um, I forgot how it was called, like DokuWiki or something like that. Um, yeah, it was some sort of like a wiki software. It wasn't like the real one that like Wikipedia is using, but like kind of like on a smaller scale. And like, why did I kill it? Because I was too tired updating all the versions, because like each version will have some sort of like a security issue, like viruses will kill my VPS, like my hosting provider will call me and like say, hey, we deleted everything because you had too many viruses, and like I need to, like get everything from backup, update everything, ask my VPS to restore me the node again, right? So like the support and like keeping up with the versions of a framework, PHP in this case, right? That's what kind of like killed the project for me. And that's going to be true about like any language, right? It will be true. It will be just like more true the bigger scale you have, right? So like if you if the only dependency that you have is like PHP and SQLite, right? As long as you're just like updating your LAMP server, like that's all that you need to do. But like the more dependencies you use, the harder it's going to get, right? Um and I had, like bad and good experiences with JavaScript and like with all the other languages. I even had like this problem with Go, where uh my uh the framework that I'm writing, Strike, I was hosting it on Fly, and I just at some point it just like stopped deploying because like the version that I had and the version that Fly had, like got out of sync, and I can install the right version locally, but like I can't install the right version on the Fly anymore, right? It just didn't work. So like I couldn't push any updates, and it's like, yeah, and it's like Go is like one of the best languages, right? That has the kind of like the version 1.0 was like out for like 8 years or whatever, right? And it's like everything is kind of like backwards compatible and all that stuff. But the more dependencies you have, in this case like fly.io, right, that like the higher the chance that it's going to break, right? And I think I have like maybe like a couple of dependencies in that Go project, right? Like, so that it wasn't Go, it wasn't like the complexity of Go project, it was just like deployment, kind of like infrastructure that killed it. So uh, again, it's hard to say what I just said in like 15 minutes, right? It's hard to say that in a tweet and get a bunch of likes. You kind of like have to take like a more contrarian takes, um, in order to yeah, to get out with your opinion.
He just stays the same and works.
Yeah.
And
Can you actually
Yeah, so like again, like it says the same as works, yes, until you have like a security vulnerability in PHP that you have to patch, and then you have to update like this thing and that thing, right? So like it's going to be kind of like true and not true about like any language, depending on like what what you're trying to do.
just speak to that stack? You build all your websites, apps, startups, projects, all of that with mostly vanilla HTML,
yeah,
uh, JavaScript
CSS.
with jQuery, PHP, and SQLite. And so that's a really simple stack, and you
Yeah,
get stuff done really fast with that. Can you just speak to the philosophy behind that?
I think
Yeah, I think the other thing that like a lot of people were discussing, and I think the what the doodle said this also. He's like, well, you're going to be the fastest in the framework that you're most familiar with, right? So like it doesn't matter like the language, the framework, the library, like it's not going to matter as much as your familiarity. So if you're doing everything in one language, that's going to be kind of like infinitely infinitely faster and infinitely like better for you to use if you want to finish some project than like trying to learn a new language, right? So so that's hard to um, it's hard to measure, right? So like uh, so we're looking at this guy who like likes PHP, right? But if you look at the how's it like Joe Blow, Jonathan Blow, who's writing his own language, right? He's going to be the fastest in his own language, right? And like the guy who Carmack, right, who wrote Doom, he's going to be the fastest in like in C and C++, right? Like he doesn't, he's not going to be fast in PHP, right? So it's a, like an argument that is hard to measure. It's funny that like Lex later kind of like goes into that. He's like, well, how do you know that, right? How did you measure that this is actually true? That like PHP is actually like faster, all that stuff. And unfortunately, it comes down to like experience. You're just like, well, in my experience, this is the, like the fastest way, right? And like everyone's experience is going to be different, so everyone's going to take their own kind of like their own ideas out of like what was fastest.
I think it's accidental because that's the thing I knew. Like I knew PHP, I knew HTML, CSS, because you make websites. And when my startup started taking off, I didn't have time to. I remember putting on my to-do list like learn Node.js because it's
This is I like this part the most is I had my list and I had like learn this, learn that, and I think this is like on a bigger scale. This is true for kind of like everyone, right? Like the thing that comes to my mind is all the people who got lost to the management positions, right? Who are like, oh, I learned, I don't know, like Angular, and I was about to learn React, but I got promoted and now I'm managing a team and everyone in the team knows React and like I wish I knew React but I only know Angular, so like it's like, oh, I feel kind of like disconnected, all of that stuff. So this is definitely kind of like a part that everyone can relate. You never have time to learn everything. You never have time to learn like every language or write every project that you want to do, right? And it's like, well, for in his case, right, he wanted to learn Node, which is I have like a uh, I would say it feels like Node is like the wrong thing to learn, right? The argument right now is that you learn Node because you want to run those like isomorphic apps that run JavaScript on the client and on the server, right? And I don't think you like have to do that, right? And so that's I think the like the sad part, right? Is that even in his attempts to be a better engineer, is getting his advice from Twitter, right? From people with anime avatars. And maybe they like know what they're talking about, like the people with anime avatars, but like through the Twitter kind of like filter, he's like not getting it, right? Like he's getting very kind of like surface level, very yeah, very like Twitter sized advice. And yeah, from that Twitter sized advice, you would assume that you need to know Node to be like an engineer right now, but it's like why? Like why do you think that?
important to switch, because
Yeah.
this obviously is much better language than PHP. And I never learned it. I never did it because I didn't have time. These things were growing like this, and I was launching more projects, and I never had time. It's like one day, I'll start coding properly, and I never got to it.
I sometimes wonder if I need to learn that stuff. It's still to do item for me to really learn Node.js or Flask or these kind of
React,
yeah,
Vue.
React.
Yeah, and like he mentions Flask, right? Which is like a framework um for Python, which I would if I was to say something to Peter, right, I would say learn Laravel, right? It's like don't learn Node. It's just like do kind of like a do instead of being like instead of trying to do the same thing that you're trying to do right now in Node, right? Go higher level in PHP instead, because that's what will bring you the most kind of like bang for the buck that you kind of like need, right? Instead of learning kind of like Next.js or Flask, learn Laravel. Like you already kind of like half there, right? And like once you understand the like the framework that's going to be like faster for you to learn, then you will understand kind of like what's going on. so, so yeah, that's definitely like a like I wish he had a better advice.
And it's there's it feels like a responsible software engineer should know how to use these, but you
Yeah.
can get stuff done so fast
I think it's
with
different,
vanilla
right?
versions of stuff.
Yeah. It's like software developers if you want to get a job, and there's like, people making stuff like startups. And if you want to be entrepreneur, probably maybe you shouldn't, right?
I wonder if there's like
Yeah, so this is probably like in this was in another section of the video. He was saying about like like one of the startups that he started, and he like directly referenced Peter Thiel, right? He's like, do the things that don't scale. So he was sending AI generated like photos of people like through the email as they were like requesting them like manually, right? And it's like that's like a perfectly valid kind of like thing, right? And doing the doing the things that like don't scale in his case, right? So like it's doing it like in plain PHP, and well, there's like a bigger thing that I wanted to bring up, but I think it's also like in a different section, so I will kind of like do it later. His project must be unmaintainable. Well, that's kind of like the point, right? It's like um, I guess I will go there. One of the things that he mentions later on in the interview is that he never worked on a team, right? So he said that uh, the only people that he kind of like worked with were, I think like one person did like a mobile app for him, right? So like you can just like say, hey, send me this API and that API, and kind of like don't kind of like talk to each other at all, right? So, and the other was a person who said like, hey, this is a mess, let's rewrite everything, but like he's not going to be as fast as this guy, right? Because like this guy doesn't like sleep and all that stuff. So like compared to this guy, any anyone who's kind of like trying to rewrite his code is going to be like going way slower, right? But he's probably kind of like just didn't have like a very talented guy as well, right? So he was like complaining about like, well, it's hard to kind of like to hire someone and all that stuff, which is true, right? There are a lot of people uh, who will tell you that they are very great and like they can't actually deliver, right? So like his experience is like one person he didn't kind of like touch any code with, right? And another person who wasn't really good, so like they tried for a bit and stopped, right? So he never worked on a team. So all the things that we kind of like would justify this, right? So like the tweet that I did was okay. Uh, you're trying to defend like React or whatever, right? Like sell him on GraphQL, right? And this is kind of like intentionally the idea is that like between kind of like GraphQL and him, there's like such a big difference, right? And his approach makes sense for what he's doing, and GraphQL actually like it makes sense for some kind of like problems, right? For some amount, like some size of the team, some amount of teams that need to talk to each other and all that stuff. But it's so much further away than, like, let's say Laravel, right? Okay, I'm not like fitting in the screen. So he's here, like GraphQL is here, and I'm saying learn Laravel, like make it like a small step that will actually like improve your life. You will actually get mostly the benefits and like slight amount of negative, right? But it's like easy to understand what that he's here, and like GraphQL is not going to help him, right? Like he never worked in a team. He just someone replied to my tweet of like, how would he do that without like federated schemas or whatever, right? It's like there is a company, there is like a scale at which you can't actually build anything without like federated schemas or whatever, right? And it's like for them, GraphQL is a thing that like makes everything simpler and like makes it actually work. For him, for Peter, right? Like going to GraphQL is all the negatives and none of the benefits, right? It's like he's writing in PHP and jQuery. Like having typed responses is not going to improve like his life like one bit, right? Like he just like he's missing so many steps before kind of like GraphQL starts makes sense to him, right? So yeah, I think like the uh I think it's funny to realize like how like unique his position is, right? And I actually think it makes sense for him to like to do what he's doing, right? Like I was doing this thing when I was I don't know 20 or whatever, right? So like that made sense for me back in the day. So but I didn't start like $1 million startups that like made me stop like learning about the code, right? So that's why he's like in his position out of my mind. Okay, I don't know how much of this is left. Uh,
I really want to measure performance and speed. I think there's a deep wisdom in that.
Yeah.
I do think that frameworks and just constantly wanting to learn the new thing, this complicated way of software engineering gets in the way. I'm not sure what to say about that because definitely, like, you shouldn't build everything from just vanilla JavaScript or vanilla C, for example.
Yeah.
C, when you're building systems engineering, is like, there's a lot of benefits for a pointer safety and all that kind of stuff.
yeah, it's funny that like he uses C++ as an example of pointer safety, which is like yeah, like in 2024 that sounds just like completely crazy out of the left field. It's like yeah, I wish I would learn C++ because that's the safe one, and it's like oh no. Oh no.
So I don't know, but it just feels like you can get so much more stuff done if you don't care about how you do it.
Man, this is my most controversial take, I think, and maybe I'm wrong, but
Yeah, so I think that's where the clip on the Twitter started about like the he's a rant against Next.js and Vercel without naming them, so everyone had like their own ideas.
I feel like there's frameworks now that raise money. They raise a lot of money, like they raise 50 million, 100 million, $300 million. And the idea is that you need to make the developers, the new developers, like when you're 18 or 20 years old, right? Um, get them to use this framework and add a platform to it, like where the framework can, it's open source, but you probably should use the platform, which is paid, to use it. And the,
Yeah, the funny part that's like it's true for kind of like any of them on like at the bigger scale, right? So like if you're using Next, you should be using Vercel, right? Like if you're using um, I don't know, like Fresh, you should be using do not deploy. If you're using Laravel, you should be using I forgot how it's called. Yeah, they have like too many names, and like I never use any of that stuff. But like even for Elixir, you have like some like hosting providers and all that stuff, right? So like it's of course, like the incentives and whatnot, they're like differently. They have like different level of like bad influence or whatever, right? But this this is true kind of like for anything, right? And you could say like, oh, it's like big C, it doesn't allow me to write assembly, right? And it's like, well, no. That's like a bit silly. And yeah, I remember when people were freaking out that Zend bought PHP, and Zend was like a hosting company and they had like a paid products, right? So like he just like doesn't remember that part. Like he says things as if PHP is like this free and completely like unmotivated by profit organization, right? And well, he's young. He's like he doesn't remember that part, but that's still yeah, it's still kind of like true about anything, right? And like even with Redis or whatever, right? Or like even Node.js, like they did like Node.js documentary about like how because of the whole like forking and all that stuff happened, right? And, like it was all about money. It's just that's how it goes.
The cost of the platforms to host it
Mhm.
are 1,000 times higher than just hosting it on a simple AWS server or
Right. So that's an interesting argument, right? And that's where the like DHH started to show up with his his opinion on like hosting providers and all that stuff. I think it's like it's true and false at the same time on like on a different scale. So the argument that I think that's the tweet that I pulled up, right? Is like, hey, I'm using Vercel for like for free or for like some like reasonable amount, and I don't have to pay like $5 for DigitalOcean, and like I don't have to learn Linux, I don't have to like learn other stuff, right? So like you choose your own. Uh, I forgot. It's like a Primogen quote, right? Like he says, you should choose your own hard, or like you choose your own easy, right? So like people just like choosing different things to learn, and if you're comparing like $20 per month for Vercel or $5 per month for like DigitalOcean, right? It's like, oh well, $20 is like way more expensive. But if you're comparing like $0 for GitHub Pages or something, right? Well, like the $0 seems like way more way more cheaper. So I think it is like it's funny that um, this is like my overall like theory of like everything. I think that like the hosting availability is the thing that shapes kind of like the framework kind of like market. Is if uh if when I was young, the easy way of getting stuff out was finding like a free shared hosting that will like cut you on everything. You will have like 5 megabytes of space and all that stuff, but like it was free, right? So like if you wanted to start something, it was impossible kind of like to find like Python hosting. It was impossible to find like even like Perl hosting, right? But it was really easy to find PHP hosting. What happened? Everyone was writing PHP, right? And the same thing is happening with JavaScript right now. I think that because it's basically free to do like static websites, right? Kind of like HTML is like is the free language, right? But with SPAs, you can also add a bunch of like functionality that like makes your HTML kind of like a spa, right? And like and it's still static, it's still free. So that's kind of like what was like pushing the SPA thing, right? And now with kind of like Vercel and Netlify and I don't know Dino deploy, deploying a JavaScript application, even like a SSR application, is still really cheap. It's like for smaller projects, it's basically zero, right? That's what's kind of like driving the like this whole revolution. It's not just like someone at some point decided like PHP is bad, JavaScript is good, right? It's like I think it's shaped by the like available stuff, and it's like if you go to me and it's like, hey, I want to learn web development, I want to build this project. I'm like, what's your budget? You're like zero. Well, now I'm not going to recommend you to like to learn I don't know, like Erlang or Python, right? Because I don't know where you can host them for zero. Uh, so you have to pay $5 a month for a thing, right? Uh, so while it's technically true that at some scale your like serverless solution is going to be kind of like more expensive than your uh rare pro social stream. Yeah. Well, trying. uh, so while it's technically true that like uh, there is like there's like a point in the graph where your next.js app is probably going to be like way more expensive than your PHP app. For most of people who are starting, they are seeing the opposite, right? Like for the graph that goes from kind of like from $0 to $5, that's where JavaScript is like the more popular, right? Because that's where it's cheap. Yeah, and he was like saying about like his VPS. It's like, hey, I have like so much traffic now that like after the podcast, right? And I think my $350 a month like VPS is still holding, and it's like, wow, 350, like that's a bit more than $5 a month, right? And like no one wants to pay $350 for a product that doesn't bring any money. Right, so like the scaling thing is a bit tricky. Okay, how much more do we have left?
VPS on DigitalOcean, right? So there's obviously like a monetary incentive here. Like we want to get a lot of developers to use this technology, and then we need to charge them money because they're going to use it in startups, and then the startups can pay for the bills. Um, but what that it kind of
Yeah, and it's again like everyone was making jokes about like all the other providers doing this, right? And it's like that's true for Laravel as well, right? So like, well, you have this Laracast that like educates everyone to use Laravel. And once you're doing a company, and once you need to send like a real emails, and once you need to do like some like something real, like save real users and all that stuff, well, that's when you start using like all the Laravel products, right? And it's like it's not like it's hidden, right? So like if I go to Laravel, like the first things like, yes, the Laracast is the place where they're re-educating you until you start liking this stuff, right? But then it's but then it starts with all of the services, right? Like Forge, Vapor, Breeze, Cashier, right? So like all the stuff that you need to make it like production ready, right? They're selling it right away, right? Like the irony is that he he's not even like using the modern PHP, so like he doesn't know that, right? He hasn't seen Laravel, he hasn't seen like all the services and all the education of new developers that they're doing, right? So like he's just repeating what he heard from anime profile pictures, people on Twitter, and they are saying this about Vercel and JavaScript, right?
destroys the information out there about learning to code because they pay YouTubers, they pay influencers, developer influencers is a big thing to like and same thing what happens with like nutrition and fitness or something. Same thing happens in developing. They pay these influencers to promote the stuff, use it, make stuff with it, make demo products
Yeah, it's funny that like later on in the video he tells about like how he how much he enjoyed paying like some like uh TikTok influencers to push his stuff, right? And it's like everyone does this, you do this.
with it. And then a lot of people were like, wow, use this. And I started noticing this because when I would ship my stuff, people would ask me, what are you using? I would say, I would just PHP, jQuery, why does it matter? And people would start kind of attacking me, like, why are you not using this new technology, this new framework, this new thing? And I say, I don't know, because this PHP thing works and I don't really, I'm optimizing for anything, just doing it just works. And I never understood like why, like I understand there's new technologies that are better and there should be improvement, but I'm very suspicious of money, just like lobbying. There's money in this developer framework scene, there's hundreds of millions.
Yeah, and I think I kind of like said it right, but like there is money everywhere. There's money in the Zen technology that like that pushes PHP, right? So like there is money everywhere. He kind of like chooses not to see that on their side and like chooses to see it on the JavaScript side, right? There are a bunch of like free on open source, and I think that's where the what the doodle was like bringing up, like Vue, for example, right? There is no kind of like corporate sponsor for Vue. That is like if your argument is like, hey, I don't want to pay for something, I just want to use it. It's like, yeah, just use like an open source project that like that you think is like better, right? Like it doesn't depend on the language. It's just the thing that you see on Twitter the most is Vercel and Next.js, right? That's that, and you're like extrapolating it to kind of like to everything.
Mhm.
That goes to ads or influence or whatever. It can't all go to developers. You don't need so many developers for a framework, and it's open source to make a lot of more money.
I heard this like so many times that like can't I can't let it go. You don't need so many developers. It's open source, right? So it's like, why then? Why then they hire the people, right? Like, why is Remix has like almost like 5 people? Why is like Marco like at least like 3 people? Why is Quick? I forgot 3 or 5 people, right? So uh, like why do all the frameworks need people? Right? Even the like smallest frameworks, even like Solid or Svelte, they do have people. They do spend money. So it's not that easy, right? And it's kind of like again like falling on deaf ears. Like he doesn't know any of this stuff. Like he doesn't kind of like understand the problems of the scale on which like all of those solutions are working, right? But it's not that easy. It's like you as one person can do kind of like as much, right? And that's why you as one person, like when you're showing your website, all right, there is like an alert window dot alert showing up, right? Because uh, that's the joke that like I made here, right? Is like you're saying, oh, like frameworks are so complicated, like I don't need this, right? And it's like, yeah, we can tell. It's like it's not like it's not like it doesn't have any consequences, right? We can tell that you're not using like maybe like a fancy UI library, right? We can tell that you're not using like this or that, right? Like that's not like a secret. Um, it's not like when you're using jQuery, there are no consequences, even though it's simpler, right? Like you're paying in something to get the simplicity, right? So, and if we are talking about like his website, like the thing that he's paying, I don't know how like easy that's going to be to show that on the like the stream, but well, I think I see it, right? Like when I refresh this page, there is like a whole bunch of like UI moving around, right? So like if I disable JavaScript, you can see it, right? So like that's the state that he's loading stuff in. Um, and then like client side, he checks this like, oh, actually this user is not signed in yet, so like let's hide all of this menus, all of that stuff. And it's like, yeah, we can tell that you're doing that. It's not like a huge secret that you're doing PHP and jQuery without any framework. We can see that. And it's like all of the things that would have been easy for you to do in the framework that are kind of like more of like a polishing step, right? Like we can see that you skipped them. It's like it's not a huge thing, right? It's like, and we can see that you're the only person on the team, right? Like when I when I do the like the keyboard navigation, right? Like what's going on here? It's like, well, there's probably like a space that's was left here, and it's like, well, I can tell that you don't have like a QA team, right? Yeah, the keyboard navigation is funky. Like I don't know. Like I'm pressing tab, but like I don't know what's going on, right? So like I think it selected this one and then it jumped to this one, but like where exactly does it jump? Like what does it mean? Right? And yeah, it's it's not a secret. It's like I don't know. Like the thing is that we can tell that like all of this is jQuery, right? It's like and for example, if I again like if I disable JavaScript again, right? Like this doesn't work anymore, right? And it's like yeah, because that's jQuery. That's like that's how you would do this in jQuery, right? There are better ways. There are better HTML CSS ways, right? So like if I go to prompts with friends and if I disable JavaScript, right, I can click those around, right? Because I didn't stop this thing with the knowledge of the web that I knew 15 years ago and said that it's fine. Right? I I I did learn stuff and it's like, yes, this is not like to make this thing work, you don't need a framework, you don't need to pay Vercel, even though this is hosted by in Vercel, by the way. You don't need to pay Vercel to do this, but you need to care about this, right? You need to test this, you need to check that like how it works and all that stuff. um, yeah, I didn't. I don't know how else. I don't know how else to see it. But like, I probably didn't test everything, right? So like, uh, right. So like, if I'm linking to this like fifth section, I should probably open this up, right? And it's like, well, that's I don't know how to do that in plain CSS, right? But once this happens, once I learn it, I would go and back and like and fix it. But he doesn't need to. He has people paying him whatever the amount of money that he thinks that all of this should be worth, right? Uh, he, did he had a tester to test that like his new model, like the text is like doesn't look bad? No, he didn't. Can we tell that? Yes, we can.
On these startups.
So that's a really good perspective. But in addition to that, is like when you say better, it's like, can we get some data on the better? Because like I want to know from the individual developer perspective, and then from a team of 5, team of 10, team of 20 developers,
Yeah.
measure how productive they are in shipping features, how many bugs they create, how many security holes. Result
PHP was not good with security for a while, but now it's good.
in
Yeah.
theory,
Yeah.
is it though? I
Now
actually
Yeah, I like that Lex is pushing him back on like, yeah, you heard that on Twitter that like he's it's not bad anymore. Like, do you know that? Like, how would you measure that? And yeah, that's so I like this part.
it's good.
now no now as you're saying it, I want to know if that's true because PHP was just the majority of
Yeah.
websites on the internet.
Could be true.
Is it just overrepresented? Same with WordPress.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a reputation that WordPress has a gigantic number of
Yeah.
security holes. I don't know if that's true. I don't know. I know it gets attacked a lot because it's so popular. It definitely
Yeah.
does have security holes, but maybe a lot of other systems have security holes as well. Anyway,
Yeah, this is just a um, on the PHP security. I have like a whole video on PHP security where I can like go a bit deeper into that. So it had like a funny meme thing, right? So like this one. Uh, um, yeah, PHP is hopelessly insecure. That's like completely not baiting like a perfectly balanced title. So uh, PHP security goes into kind of like two camps. So one camp is kind of like community. That's the one that I hate the most. PHP community is full of people who don't care about security and they're just doing stuff uh, and they're just hoping that the kind of like the language have fixed it, right? And which is like in the most uh, in the most cases that's like attributed to Laravel, right? So like Laravel was like, hey, all the PHP developers who are left who are professionals, let's kind of like carve out the niche for us. So like we will probably have to make PHP thing work for like 10 more years. Let's kind of like let's band together and let's do something, right? which kind of like helped, right? So like it was like a bit of kind of like reset, right? So like there was like a bigger PHP community and kind of like a Laravel community, so that was a bit more kind of like closed off and a bit more uh how do I say it? I don't know, adults. That's the only word that comes to mind. So which yeah, I still think that PHP community is kind of like bad and they don't care. There are like some exceptions and they mostly kind of like are in and around the Laravel community, but I don't think it's enough. I think that like the cavalier like, well, it works, like I'm making money, I just closed this project and like I'm going to switch to the next one, so I don't care what they're going to do, how they're going to deal with all of my problems, right? So that just I don't know, just like yeah, the community is kind of like I think the like the big problem, and the other big problem is just like the surface for the security issues in PHP is way bigger than everyone else, right? So, and again, I'm talking about like the kind of like the PHP as like Peter would use, right? Not like Laravel, but like the older kind of like PHP, right? Like everything is just string concatenated, uh, just like push directly to database, all that stuff, right? So like it's just like the bit of success, right, and the bit of kind of like the failure is like everything in PHP is like in vanilla PHP is set out so that you will make a failure. You will like do things that are wrong and all that stuff, which is which is unfortunate. But like I think to say that like hey PHP fixed everything is very unfair because like they didn't. Like they de facto didn't, but also if you make a website that is like static HTML page using I don't know like Gatsby, right? It is going to be like infinitely more secure than a thing that you cobbled together in PHP without any concern for the security, right? And like, why do I know that there wasn't any concern? Because PHP community as a community, like they don't have concerns. They don't have concerns about like their website looking good, right? Like they don't have concerns about security. They don't have concerns about all that stuff. Of course, there are exceptions, but like the general field is is too scary. It's like if you show me like one PHP file and say like, hey, make sure that it's secure, and it's like, well, what's the point? Like the rest that's going to be around this file is hopelessly insecure. Why am I even trying to spend my time fixing this thing, which leads to the thing where no one cares about it and no one fixes it, right?
I just sort of questioning the conventional wisdom that keeps wanting to push software engineers towards frameworks, towards
They're complicated.
complex,
Yeah.
like super complicated sort of software engineering approaches that stretch out the time it takes to actually build a
Man,
thing.
100%. And it's the same thing with big corporations. Like 80% of the people don't do anything. It's like
Right.
it's not efficient. And if you're
Yeah, and efficiency thing is like uh I in my career I kind of like I'm starting a lot of projects and it's like the the amount of time that you spend to start a project is going to be very different like depending on like what where are you starting this project in, right? So like um if you're doing a thing that you just need to like to deploy, um you have like an hour, right? And you need to push pixels on the screen. If you just go and open up like a free account on like Netlify or Cell, right? Or Dino Deploy or Fly, I guess, right? Like the amount of time that you spend there is like way different than the amount of time that you spend in like a have you wrote like a security review for all the dependencies that you're using and it's like make sure to create like a coverage report for your test and all that stuff, right? Like there are different there are just different setups in which you work and unfortunately some of those things are required, right? So like Unfortunately, it's like, hey, yes, you could commit your like AWS secret right into the source code because you're like the only person around, right? And I have like a friends that are um, in the kind of like the freelance and all that stuff. And on Upwork, it is like a perfectly normal thing for you to say, hey, I have a job, like go, I need to this bug to be fixed. Here's my FTP with user and password that is like read write, right? So like with all of the permissions, and here's the file where the bug is. Tell me the price that you're going to need to fix it, right? And then I will choose you. So there are 10 more people who have the same production FTP access or SSH, right? Like it doesn't matter, it's like whatever they use. But like the amount of insecurity kind of like in those systems that like in those processes, right? It's like basically on the public internet you have your FTP right access, and it's like, well, that seemed fine for that situation, but like you can't do that in a production, like in a kind of product in a company, right? Because like if everyone would do this, like the company will not survive, right? So for him, for solo dev, of course, all of this sounds like a red tape, right? But for like a security head of security in a big corporation, all of this stuff is like stuff that is like a lower lower level requirement, because it's like, oh, otherwise like the people will like store AWS secrets in the Git and all that stuff, right? Oh no, oh no, I scrolled it, oh no.
Life like a living hell, you know. There's frameworks now that raise money. They understand there's new technologies that don't even
And from a teacher, it was just the majority of
yeah,
websites security was frameworks or
they're
common
complex.
approaches. That's
Thing with big corporations, that 80% of the people
Yeah.
don't do anything. It's like
right.
it's not efficient, and if your benchmark is like people building stuff that actually gets done, and like for society, right? Like if we want to save time, we should probably use technology um, that's simple, that's pragmatic, that's like that works, that's not overly complicated, doesn't.
Yeah, so half of this is true, half is not, right? So like the half that is true is like, well, like we want our stuff kind of like to be efficient, right? Like we don't want to be spinning, kind of like spending our time in meetings, all that stuff, right? Like if our goal is to make a product that like works and actually helps someone, well, probably like if you focus on the, let's say you're Twitter, right? So like if you as a Twitter want to kind of like make the world better, right? You can probably be built with like a team of 10, right? But because you're not just Twitter, you're competing with Threads, you're competing with Instagram, competing with YouTube. There needs to be like a 100 people team that is like experimenting with like a smallest dopamine hits on your application, because your hits should be slightly better than the hits of all of your competition, right? That's what like that's what makes it complicated, right? It's like we are not optimizing on the basics, right? Like his products are optimized on the basics. It's like you give me this thing, I give you this thing. It's like the transaction is finished, thank you, right? But like the amount of crap that like there's probably, I don't know, like a 5 year project, like somewhere at YouTube, there's just like, hey, if we do this, we might like increase on conversion by like 1%, right? It's like all of those kind of like shavings, all of those like very small payoff things that like he wouldn't spend his time on, right? But like once you're at like YouTube scale, it's like 1% is a huge deal, right? And like, and you can afford write 5 frameworks or however like Google has, right? Just to see which one is better and all that stuff. So yeah, uh, it's tricky.
Make your life like a living hell, you know.
and
And
use a framework when it obviously solves a problem, a direct
yeah,
problem that you
of
need.
course, yeah, of course. I'm not saying you should code without a
Yeah, well, the problem is like both of them don't know what frameworks are. They both don't know what problems they solve. So it's like a bit abstract when they're talking about it.
framework. You should use whatever you want, but yeah, I think it's suspicious, and I think it's suspicious
Okay.
when I talk about it on Twitter. Like there's this army comes out,
Yeah.
there's these framework armies.
Yeah.
It's man,
Yeah, I'm like a soldier in the framework army.
something my gut tells me.
I want to ask the framework army, what have they built this week? It's the Elon question. What did you do this week?
Yeah, and did you make
Yeah, and this is kind of like a bit stupid argument, right? And again, the what the doodle said, kind of like exactly the same thing. Is like, oh yeah, of course, like I did this thing, I did like that thing. It's and like I used framework, and it's kind of like no different, right? There are like other people, other startups that are using like different other technologies, and again, like most of them are using some sort of framework. So like trying to say that's like, hey, my way is better, while like 99% of other people doing it differently, and they're also making money, they're also making projects. And it's like what are you talking about? Like this is the stupidest this is the stupidest thing that you could ever say, right?
money with it? Did you charge users? Is it a real business? And um, yeah.
Uh, so going back to the cowboy. First of
Well,
all,
some don't look like you, right? But some do,
every aspect of this is pretty incredible. I'm also just looking at the interface; it's really well done.
Yeah, so this is very well done
right? But some
interface.
do.
Every
uh,
aspect of this is
we
pretty
showed.
incredible. I'm also just looking at the
Yeah, so this is a very well done interface, right? So like it's kind of like white on white. So like what is this one, right? Like, well, I think it says make video, but like how do I know that? Well, I'm just guessing it's like white on white, right? So I think Lex is a bit like too easily impressed, right? This would never go close to the amount of attention that like Ryan Florence spends on the Trello demo, right? It's like all of his stuff should be like exactly perfect and like exactly great, right? And it's like this wouldn't be merged, right? This is a completely like unacceptable,
interface. It's really well done. So this is
right? So this is a very well done. Like what exactly is very well done, right? Like it's done by if you would show this to me, I would say, okay, so it was done by a person who wanted to get it kind of like done as quickly as possible, and he he like I don't want to kind of like dunk on him too much. There is like some attention to detail. There are like um, um, there are like some things that he kind of like geeked out on and like wanted to figure out, right? But most of it is kind of like utilitarian, right? It's like most of it is there just to get it kind of like done as quickly as possible. So I wouldn't be like fanning out on this and like saying that's like, oh, this is like the best thing ever. And there's probably like for each, I don't know, like 100 by 100 like square kind of like worth of UI. There is probably like so many improvements that you can do there that you can hire a team of 10 people and they will be working for like 2 years, right? It's just a question of like where do you stop, and like do you stop at just like the minimum bare level, or do you go deeper, right? And that's probably like the difference between like doing it by yourself or doing in a bigger team. In conclusion, um, again, this is like I'm taking like kind of like 3 minute video, right, and like talking about kind of like saying like, hey, like it's missing some nuance, right? And they didn't have like all the time in the world to go through all the nuance, but unfortunately, I think like kind of like both Lex and Peter kind of like not deep enough into this world, so that they can kind of like very confidently kind of like talk about it. So they're talking kind of like a bit surface level, a bit like in general it would be good to do it like this, or in general it would be good to do that. So of course I have of course I have some issues with the stuff that they're saying, and I think it's kind of like a curve, right? So there is a curve of like kind of like 80-20, right? As like if I want to do something quickly and I want to get most of it out, what is the way to do it? And especially for him, given the familiarity with the tools that he has, of course this is going to work for him, right? And I would say that if he would spend some time, right, and focus on him kind of like being a developer as opposed to him being as a um, entrepreneur or whatever, right? Or a businessman or manager or whatnot, is like, of course, as a developer, I would say like the next step is just like learn Laravel, right? Like learn just like a slightly more frameworky way of doing it. And once you use it a bit, you will say, "Oh, that's why they're doing it. Oh, that's why that's like they're doing it, right?" And um, the argument of, well, it makes money. I don't care how it looks, right? This is a very kind of like capitalistic way of thinking, and yeah, let's. I don't see how you can kind of like argue too hard with that. Like the capitalism is selling the worst possible product at the highest possible price, right? And he's really good at it. For him, making a better product and selling it for the same price is of course not like good, right? Like why would he spend his time making product better if no one is going, if like more people not going to use it, right? So like, well, maybe like he improved the accessibility or some other like aspects of his thing, right? And now like 1% more people are going to sign up. Is that worth it, right? Like, is that worth his time and all that stuff? And this is where I think the this is where I think the like it makes sense for like a team, right? So like if I'm a bigger company and I can afford to make my product a bit better, not because I'm competing with myself, but because I'm like competing with someone else, right? It's like that's where I will make my button like slightly fancier because it's not it's not like the clients that I would have got anyway is the clients that I'm getting away from like someone else, right? And in the interview, he had like a moment where he was saying like, well, and then they did like a phone version of my application, and like they made all the money, right? So like his whole business idea is that like bigger companies like didn't compete with him yet, right? Because bigger companies can hire like real developers to do the same thing that he's doing but like 10 times better, right? And he's not competing with those, he's competing kind of like with himself. So that's probably where I want to leave it. And if any of them, if Peter or Lex want to learn web development, I would be I would be glad to help. I feel like I have the like my perspective on this is that like I'm uh, I'm doing projects on a different scale, and I can kind of like jump back and forth, and I can like do this thing the right way, do this thing the faster way and whatnot. So I feel like I can guide them if they ever want to do it. And okay, I think that's it. And I don't know, like and subscribe or something.